Well, hello, and I just want to talk a little bit about what this channel is and what we are actually doing here on political science. So, we're going to critique some works or all the works by the major intellectuals in different sort of political classes. This is more for people who are at university and doing hires or looking or involved in politics and looking to review what has been said by other politically significant figures in various aspects of the political compass. One of the reasons I did my political compass was to let you see where I was in the political compass and when I'm being objective about people who are basically have a different political viewpoint, that where my objectivity is coming from. So I'm going to start with the Jewish question by Karl Marx. And obviously it has been a Holocaust Day recently for the remembrance of the Holocaust. Now, anti-Semitism has been about for years and years, and even longer than Marxism in the 19th century, or the 18th century. But the fact is that he has written a number of these publications. Let me just see if I can. That's better. So a number of these publications. This is on Marxist.org. So any budding Marxists out there, these are audiobooks, which would have been great because obviously, I have dyslexia, and the audiobooks would make my life a hell of a lot easier to go through. So we're going to break this down. The Jewish question. We're going to start with the Jewish question and not the critique of Engels' philosophy of the right. Just now, we'll go back and cover each and every one of Marx's books, and we'll break it down into manageable sections. The Jewish question audio is about an hour and 26 minutes. So we'll break it down, because I'll be doing commentary on it. We'll break it down into 3 separate parts. And this will be useful to actually debate and analyse what is actually said. Now, whether or not, for instance, National Socialism under Adolf Hitler in his Mein Kampf, which we'll also cover, had any or utilised any of Marx's teachings like on the Jewish question, then that's something that we would have to look at and see if there was any indication from Hitler whether the Marxism played a part in National Socialism. Obviously, 2 different strains in the authoritarian left. And we'll look at, obviously, Friedrich Engels advocating genocide, which may also have had an influence on National Socialism, which came obviously, nearly 100 years later, or nearly exactly 100 years later was the fall of the Third Reich, virtually nearly 100 years on from Marx's writing of the Jewish question. Obviously, Marx had other periodicals, Neue Römische Zeitung, which Engels also wrote in as well. And obviously Engels being Marx's financier. But let's start with this. I've never read any of these books, so this is as new to me as it is to you. And thanks very much, Marxist.org, who are the website who have produced this litany of Marxism. And we'll see if the relevance of this today. I'll go back and do it in chronological order, but part 1 will start with the first 30 minutes on the Jewish Chronicle, and then we'll pick up where we left off, at least 30 minutes. It should be noted that Marx did come from a Jewish lineage, although I'm sure he changed to Protestantism, or he changed to some other Christian faith. And we'll see what the relevance is in greater socialist teachings that Marx, because obviously Marxism is only a part of socialism, and how Marxism infused other aspects of socialism and other parts of politics just generally. We only have to look at
On the Jewish question.
what happened with Labour,
Karl Marx.
the Labour Party in the UK.
1. Bruno Bauer. The Jewish question. Braunschweig, 1843. The German Jews desire emancipation. What kind of emancipation do they desire? Civic, political emancipation. Bruno Bauer replies to them, no one in Germany is politically emancipated. We ourselves are not free. How are we free to you? You Jews are egoists if you demand a special emancipation for yourselves as Jews. As Germans, you ought to work for the political emancipation of Germany, and as human beings, for the emancipation of mankind. And you should feel the particular kind of your oppression and your shame not as an exception to the rule, but on the contrary as a confirmation of the rule. Or do the Jews demand the same status as Christian subjects of the state? In that case, they recognize that the Christian state is justified, and they recognize, too, the regime of general oppression. Why should they...
Now, whether or not there was actually genuine oppression of Jews at this point in 1844, we would have to go look back in history and get some primary research on what the status of Jews were. Was there actually a legitimate, were they treated as second-class citizens, or is this about getting special one rule for you, one for another because I'm oppressed? And this moves in and moves along the line towards, well, this is in Germany, so this moves along the timeline towards the start of National Socialism. So this type of commentary started before National Socialism actually took hold. It's quite the oppression. Now, maybe this was a real oppression and not just a made-up oppression.
Disapprove of their special yoke if they approve of the general yoke. Why should the German be interested in the liberation of the Jew if the Jew is not interested in the liberation of the German?
So again, that comes down to one rule for one and one for another. So rather, obviously the Jews in Germany had a big impact in communism and Marxism, and whether or not from this writing that whether or not this was like Jewish supremacy, or whether or not this was the Jews were actually being oppressed and treated as second-class citizens, I'm not really sure. I mean, we'd have to look at primary sources at that time to find out if there was oppression, actual legislative oppression of the Jews, or whether or not they wanted sort of special treatment to have one rule for them and one for another, which is quite interesting in Marx's writings.
The Christian state knows only privileges. In this state, the Jew has the privilege of being a Jew. As a Jew, he has rights which the Christians do not have. Why should he want rights which he does not have, but which Christians enjoy? In wanting to be emancipated from the Christian state, the Jew is demanding that the Christian state should give up its religious prejudice. Does he, the Jew, give up his religious prejudice? Has he, then, the right to demand that someone else should renounce his religion? By its very nature, the Christian state is incapable of emancipating the Jew. But, adds Bauer, by his very nature, the Jew cannot be emancipated. So long as the state is Christian and the Jew is Jewish, the one is as incapable of granting emancipation as the other is of receiving it. The Christian state can behave towards the Jew only in the way characteristic of the Christian state, that is, by granting privileges, by permitting the separation of the Jew from the other subjects, by making him feel the pressure of all the other separate spheres of society, and feel it all the more intensely because he is in religious opposition to the dominant religion. But the Jew, too, can behave towards the state only in a Jewish way. That is, by treating it as something alien to him, by counterposing his imaginary nationality to the real nationality, by counterposing his illusory law to the real law, by deeming himself justified in separating himself from mankind, by abstaining on principle from taking part in the historical movement, by putting his trust in a future which has nothing in common with the future of mankind in general, and by seeing himself as a member of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people as the chosen people. On what grounds, then, do you Jews want emancipation? On account of your religion? It is the mortal enemy of the state religion. As citizens? In Germany, there are no citizens. As human beings? But you are no more human beings than those to whom you appeal. Bauer has posed the question of Jewish emancipation in a new form, after giving a critical analysis of the previous formulations and solutions of the question. What, he asks, is the nature of the Jew who is to be emancipated, and of the Christian state that is to emancipate him? He replies by a critique.
So it's very interesting to find out what they're being emancipated from. It's to look back at this historical example and find out what was actually happening in Germany, that there was a requirement for Jewish emancipation. Will they be mistreated at that time? I mean, this is nearly 100 years since before the end of the Second World War. But obviously the rise of National Socialism happened in the 30s, I think the late 1920s and early 30s. Then that was the start. So it's nearly 100 years on, and this question about the Jews being asked by somebody who's actually Jewish is quite interesting.
Of the Jewish religion. He analyzes the religious opposition between Judaism and Christianity. He elucidates the essence of the Christian state, and he does all this audaciously, trenchantly, wittily, and with profundity, in a style of writing that is as precise as it is pithy and vigorous. How, then, does Bauer solve the Jewish question? What is the result? The formulation of a question is its solution. The critique of the Jewish question is the answer to the Jewish question. The summary, therefore, is as follows. We must emancipate ourselves before we can emancipate others. The most rigid form of the opposition between the Jew and the Christian is the religious opposition. How is an opposition resolved? By making it impossible. How is religious opposition made impossible? By abolishing religion. As soon as Jew and Christian recognize that their respective religions are no more than different stages in the development of the human mind, different snakeskins cast off by history, and that man is the snake who slew them, the relation of Jew and Christian is no longer religious, but is only a critical, scientific, and human relation. Science, then, constitutes their unity, but contradictions in science are resolved by science itself. The German Jew, in particular, is confronted by the general absence of political emancipation and the strongly marked Christian character of the state. In Bauer's conception, however, the Jewish question has a universal significance, independent of specifically German conditions. It is the question of the relation of religion to the state, of the contradiction between religious constraint and political emancipation.
So, obviously, it sounds like there wasn't a separation between church and state at this point, or if there was a separation between church and state, are they just talking about the fact that the majority of people in Germany at that time were Christian? And very interesting that they're talking about the getting rid of religion that may divide people based on socialist tradition. So it's we know, because we know Marx's work, that it's the worker, it's the worker that has been exploited by the entrepreneur. And that is the issue. If the worker wasn't being exploited, so any subdivisions of that just interferes from the collective. Very interesting.
Emancipation from religion is laid down as a condition, both to the Jew who wants to be emancipated politically, and to the state which is to effect emancipation, and is itself to be emancipated. Very well, it is said.
They've not elaborated on what the emancipation is from. I mean, even if they, for instance, it went from a capitalist to a communist situation or even a socialist situation, but let's talk more about the communism, that instead of working for the entrepreneur where you can leave your job, you may be stuck in a job that you hate and working for the state. I think I prefer to work for the entrepreneur and be less emancipated. Well, I don't even know if I'd be more emancipated working for the state.
And the Jew himself says it. The Jew is to become emancipated not as a Jew, not because he is a Jew, not because he possesses such an excellent, universally human principle of morality. On the contrary, the Jew will retreat behind the citizen and be a citizen, although he is a Jew and is to remain a Jew. That is to say, he is and remains a Jew, although he is a citizen and lives in universally human conditions. His Jewish and restricted nature triumphs always in the end over his human and political obligations. The prejudice remains in spite of being outstripped by general principles. But if it remains, then, on the contrary, it outstrips everything else. Only sophistically, only apparently, would the Jew be able to remain a Jew in the life of the state. Hence, if he wanted to remain a Jew, the mere appearance would become the essential and would triumph. That is to say, his life in the state would be only a semblance, or only a temporary exception to the essential and the rule. The capacity of present-day Jews and Christians to become free. Einundzwanzig Bogen, page 57. Let us hear, on the other hand, how Bauer presents the task of the state. France, he says, has recently shown us, Proceedings of the Chamber of Deputies, December 26, 1840, in the connection with the Jewish question, just as it has continually done in all other political questions, the spectacle of a life which is free, but which revokes its freedom by law, hence declaring it to be an appearance, and on the other hand contradicting its free laws by its action. The Jewish question, page 64. In France, universal freedom is not yet the law. The Jewish question, too, has not yet been solved, because legal freedom, the fact that all citizens are equal, is restricted in actual life, which is still dominated and divided by religious privileges, and this lack of freedom in actual life reacts on...
So it doesn't look like there's any legislative discrimination against people who are Jewish, but it looks like there may be just things that actually happen because people are Jewish, and that's concerning because it sounds like they want privileges. They want to be able to tell other people what to do, and that's one rule for you and one for another. That's interesting.
And compels the latter to sanction the division of the citizens, who as such are free, into oppressed and oppressors. Page 65. When, therefore...
So, I mean, there's the oppressed and oppressors coming right out of Marxism. That's where all these... everything that's happening just now is coming out of Marxism, from the oppressed and oppressors. All these groups, regardless if that individual is doing better than somebody who's not in that oppressed group, they have changed from the worker being oppressed to these groups, racial groups, being oppressed, and also having mass immigration, and also them thinking or them getting told they're oppressed. This is the spread of Marxism and the Marxist doctrine.
Would the Jewish question be solved for France? The Jew, for example, would have ceased to be a Jew if he did not allow himself to be prevented by his laws from fulfilling his duty to the state and his fellow citizens.
All right, so I mean, we'll have to read about what these laws are that the Jewish people are not allowed to fulfill to their fellow Christians, I take it, in Germany at that point, by their own religious law, and what it is that Judaism, because obviously Judaism is going into politics, and we'll have to find out, because I don't know, I've not read anything with regards to the underlying laws of Judaism. So that'll be very interesting to see if it's restrictions that the Jewish faith place on Jewish people in interaction with non-Jews, and to find out exactly what that interaction is. I don't know, I'll do a speech on that as well.
For example, if on the Sabbath he attended the Chamber of Deputies and took part in the official proceedings. Every religious privilege.
So that's just mechanism, obviously. The Saturdays, the Sabbath, the day, and Sunday for Christians. So Jews aren't meant to break their own Sabbath, their own holy day. And so that's just one part. So that's quite interesting. That's rather pretty much mundane anyway. In the fact that it's not really that big a deal, but I think there's probably other things in Judaism that might be more intrusive in day-to-day life.
For also the monopoly of a privileged church would have been abolished altogether, and if some or many persons, or even the overwhelming majority, still believe themselves bound to fulfill religious duties, this fulfillment ought to be left to them as a purely private matter. Page 65. There is no longer any religion when there is no longer any privileged religion. Take from religion its exclusive power, and it will no longer exist. Page 66. Just as Monsieur Martin du Nord saw the proposal to omit mention of Sunday in the law as a motion to declare that Christianity has ceased to exist, with equal reason, and this reason is very well founded, the declaration that the law of the Sabbath is no longer binding on the Jew would be a proclamation abolishing Judaism. Page 71. Bauer, therefore, demands, on the one hand, that the Jew should renounce Judaism, and that mankind in general should renounce religion, in order to achieve civic emancipation. On the other hand...
So, to get rid of religion, obviously, I mean, I am an atheist and don't believe in religion anyway, but that doesn't colour my political beliefs. But obviously, the communist wants to get rid of religion, including Judaism, and get rid of all religion to focus on the workers' struggle. And the workers' struggle would be to give up capitalism, where the individual or the entrepreneur controls the entity and is replaced by the state controlling the entity, especially in communism, that part of communism. Obviously, various parts of socialism don't necessarily believe in that. They have varying degrees between social democracy and even further to the left and more authoritarian. So that's certainly something that we'll discuss and look at in further greater depth.
He quite consistently regards the political abolition of religion as the abolition of religion as such. The state which presupposes religion is not yet a true, real state. Of course, the religious notion affords security to the state. But to what state? To what kind of state? Page 97. At this point, the one-sided formulation of the Jewish question becomes evident. It was by no means sufficient to investigate who is to emancipate, who is to be emancipated. Criticism had to investigate a third point. It had to inquire what kind of emancipation is in question, what conditions follow from the very nature of the emancipation that is demanded. Only the criticism of general emancipation itself would have been the conclusive criticism of the Jewish question and its real merging in the general question of time. Because Bauer does not raise the question to this level, he becomes entangled in contradictions. He puts forward conditions which are not based on the nature of political emancipation itself. He raises questions which are not part of his problem, and he solves problems which leave this question unanswered. When Bauer says of the opponents of Jewish emancipation, their terror was only that they assumed the Christian state to be the only true one, and did not subject it to the same criticism that they had applied to Judaism. Page 3. We find that his error lies in the fact that he subjects to criticism only the Christian state, not this state as such, that he does not investigate the relation of political emancipation to human emancipation, and, therefore, puts forward conditions which can be explained only by uncritical confusion of political emancipation with general human emancipation.
So, I'll end that as part 1 there. So up to 12 minutes 15. So what he's saying is that I don't know if the Jews were... it sounds like what they're saying is the Jews were not excluded from political input in the Jewish predominantly Christian state. But it's not the fact that the Germany in 1844 was non-secular. It was just that the majority of people were Christian, and it sounds like they are trying to overturn this Christianity, which comes from obviously Jesus being Jewish and the Bible coming from what is now Israel, but from the Jews. The Jews are now trying to overturn this, or some of the Jews, should we say, not all the Jews, but some of the Jews are trying to overturn this and become more atheist, and not actually have that requirement for a state actually having any religion or the people within the state. And the oppression is not coming from the top down, from regulation or legislation within the state. It's coming from interactions, obviously, with other Christians that may react differently because of the rules within Judaism. That might be the problem. And the Jews, because they're a minority, are feeling oppressed because they're not prepared to compromise and fit in with the Christians. That's what it sounds like, and that might be a misinterpretation, but it was very difficult getting a handle on where he was coming up because he was unspecific. He wasn't being specific about what this oppression was. You have to be specific. You can't just say all Jews in 1844 were oppressed, unless it was like Spain and they were all kicked out of the country, or there was a legislative oppression by the state, which it sounds like there wasn't. But I mean, as I said, I'm not an expert on 18th century and 19th century German Jewish politics, and this is quite interesting to actually find out. We might have to go into that in a wee bit more depth to get some sort of point of reference for where they're coming from with the Jewish question. Well, that's part number 1. I think I'll do it more broken up, and hopefully that will make it easier to digest.